Hi, Peter Wheelhauer here. This is the final lecture that we'll have on the Declaration of Independence. In this case, we're going to be talking about unalienable rights and then looking at the concept of the Declaration of Independence as being a social compact, not just expressing in general the relationship between citizens and their government, but it's in a specific way talking about the community of the United States, particularly at the founding era, but also in later decades. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these rights are the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We love this phrase, right? Everybody knows this phrase, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What does it mean? So first of all, I want you to notice that it uses the phrase among, right? So this is not a comprehensive listing of all of your natural rights. There are other rights that exist. These are just the few that they're going to talk about right now, or mention right now. That among these rights are the right to life. You have an inherent right as a human being, you have a right to live. You have a right to liberty. You have a right to do what you want to do. You have a right to control and self-govern your own lives. And you have the right to pursue happiness. You don't have a right to be happy. You have a right to pursue happiness. That is to pursue things that will satisfy you, that will make you happy. Now, what's interesting about these three is that these oftentimes come into conflict. What is one person's pursuit of happiness may in fact impinge on the life or the liberty of another person. What one person sees as their right to do be out of liberty impinges on somebody else's life. Right? So these things are interesting because they're in conflict with each other. So the question is, how can you create a community, create a governing system in which all three of these are held in balance? Right? Where you have both a right to life, and you have a right to liberty. You have a right to pursue happiness, but it seems like there's a limit on that because at some point you're going to run into somebody else's fundamental rights. Okay? So there was an interesting article that I read that by a historian. One point of this is that this particular phrase was adapted by Jefferson in the original draft of the Declaration from John Locke. John Locke said your unalienable rights are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, right? Which is a slightly different economic take than merely the pursuit of happiness. But Jefferson didn't make up the phrase pursuit of happiness. He didn't just kind of say, well, I don't like Locke's choice of words. There was a whole set of writings at the time Jefferson was writing that was also using this phrase, the pursuit of happiness. And so even Will Smith recognizes that he doesn't make up the pursuit of happiness. Anybody get that reference? Will Smith. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. There was an interesting article that came out several years ago by historian Carol Hamilton, and she went back and she looked at this use of the phrase because everybody was talking about it being borrowed from Locke and adapted by Jefferson from Locke. But in fact, she said there's a whole set of writings going on at the time about what the pursuit of happiness means. And in her research demonstrates that at the time this phrase, pursuit of happiness, means you have the right to pursue civic and social courage, virtue and moderation in your community. The pursuit of happiness phrase at the time did not mean you get to do whatever you darn well please as long as you're not hurting somebody else. It meant you have the right to make your community happy. You have the right to act in such a way that you're acting with courage and virtue to pursue happiness for the community. This is not you can do whatever you want. And this is a common misunderstanding because we hear pursuit of happiness and we say, you're not allowed to do that. And your response is, but it makes me happy. It's kind of like the Japanese person who's doing the tidying up your house. Anybody have Netflix in your watch? Have you seen this tidy up your home person? Right? This object, this book, doesn't bring me joy. I'll get rid of it. If this brings me joy, then I'm going to keep it. Right? This is not do whatever brings you joy. Right? This is not pursue whatever you want. as much money as you want, as much property as you want. That's not what they were talking about. They were talking about doing what's good for the community. Thoughts, questions? To secure these rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Men, by the way, here clearly meaning gender inclusive, because governments are not just instituted among males. Governments, in fact, influence everybody. Governments are instituted to secure these rights. So you take these rights that are fundamental to everybody, and then the navigation of who wins, of whose rights take precedence at what point in time, governments are the ones who are supposed to protect people's rights. Governments do not grant you the right to life. They do not grant you liberty. They do not grant you the right to pursue happiness. You have those as a human being, and the government is supposed to secure those for you and protect those for everybody in society, so that everybody can live exercising their fundamental rights. The legitimacy of the governments to do this come from the consent of the governed. It's the people who give to the government consent to manage their own behavior. Governments are instituted to secure rights, that is, to make the laws to manage all these difficulties. The people who participate consent. How many of you have voted in a presidential election? Okay, those of you who have not voted in a presidential election, who gave consent for the choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? Who gave consent? The people who did vote. If you have not yet had the opportunity to vote for President of the United States, you are reaping the benefit, the effects, the ripples of previous generations who have. People who have voted and participated and sought participation and fought for rights in the past, they have done so on your behalf, and you are coasting on their energy. You are coasting as a result of their work. And soon, in 2020, all of you will have the right to vote. And it's up to you then to do the same thing, to leverage that consent, participate in the process. Consent doesn't mean you only consent to the winner if it's the person you like. Consent means you're consenting to a process by which the government is put together. So the governments derive their powers from your consent. People from other cultures have a very difficult time with this. I remember several years ago I was speaking to a group of students from Taiwan, and I was asked to teach about what does it mean to be in America? What's the American political system like? And I went to the Declaration of Independence, and I got to this phrase: governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and governments don't grant rights. Governments secure rights you already have. You're like, wait, what? Because the whole mindset in their whole culture for 5,000 years is the governments exist to give you rights and tell you what you're allowed to do. Your consent has nothing to do with it. Chinese political system for 5,000 years has nothing to do with the consent of the government. It's the government that imposes on the people. So their minds were really blown by this idea that our assumption is that governments secure rights that we already have as human beings. They don't grant the rights, and if we don't like the government, get rid of it. We can cease consenting to our government. That's different. And that moves us then into the last point. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. What? When the governments that exist destroy rights rather than securing them, when they arbitrarily destroy the right to life or rescind the right to life, rescind the right to liberty, rescind the right to pursue happiness, They are destroying the rights that you naturally have as a human being. We're not talking about people who break the social contract. We're not talking about a murderer, right? We're not talking about somebody who steals somebody's stuff. We're talking about the government just kind of stepping in and saying, you know what, that's mine. I'm taking your life, no explanation. I have the authority to do it. Right? So when governments destroy the rights, they have broken the contract. It's then our right as the governed to alter or to abolish the government. That is, we're going to rescind our consent. If the government destroys rights, it's the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, rescinding our consent to be governed by them and replacing it with a new government. This is not advocating anarchy. This is not saying get rid of governments. This is saying get rid of a tyrannical, rights-destroying government and replace it with one that is not tyrannical, that will secure those rights. This is their point here. Institute a new government, lay its foundations on principles and organizing its powers so as to affect safety and happiness. Right? That goes back to securing the rights. Yeah.
So, like, a couple days ago, I read an article about how Trump was, taking back trans people can go into the military.
Yes.
So, like, is he disrupting their pursuit of happiness since they want to go into the military and now they can't?
Maybe. Maybe. And then the question becomes, at what point does that pattern of actions hit critical mass with the public's mind that the government itself is no longer legitimate?
Is it a crime to go against the Declaration of Independence, or just the Constitution? Even though the Declaration isn't like a set of laws or anything. But...
Right. So the Declaration, you can go against the Declaration all day long.
Okay.
In fact, what they're saying is, all these things that we think are true, the king has gone against all these things, and that justified their own rebellion. Okay. Like, this is a legal argument justifying their treason. So, the way that they solved this problem, they said, in the monarchy system that they currently were living under, they have no solution. Because you can't vote the king out. You can elect new members of parliament, but parliament's weak and powerless. When the king dies, you're just going to get the same pattern with the king's offspring. So the only solution here was to completely break and alter the situation. The way they resolved it for us on an ongoing basis was, instead of having to destroy our government whenever it becomes problematic, is that we have new elections. And every 2 years, we get to completely remake Congress. And every 4 years, we get to choose the new president. And so they incorporated that altering process into the political system so that we wouldn't have to devolve into anarchy and have the whole thing come crashing down. Because under the Articles of Confederation, that's what happened. Remember chapter 2, the big problem with the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution, is it didn't work. Right? This was a big problem, so they set up a new system to try to make this work. So the question is, if this is destroying the right, destroying the opportunity of fundamental right to liberty, fundamental right to pursue happiness for trans people wanting to go to the military, then the question then is, at what point is a political solution no longer viable? And if elections continue to hurt that, does it expand beyond a relatively small number of people into a much greater number of people? Yeah, that's kind of when you get critical mass for the government to say we're not going to do it. Does that help?
So my question is, like, would this, like, say if it is war, like, and the government makes you go and you don't want to, is that like a way of this destroying fundamental rights?
So if we're at war and the government drafts you, makes you go to war, does that destroy your fundamental rights? Maybe. If so, war is a political process, and so we used to have a draft, and so all of your maybe you have uncles or great uncles or great aunts or grandfathers or something like that who were in Vietnam, for example, or in Korea. That's when we had a draft, and if your number came up, you went, unless you got a deferment for bone spurs, like Donald Trump, or you moved to Russia, like Bill Clinton. But aside from that, the general idea is that everybody's got to serve. We need an army. So now we have a volunteer service. Nobody forces anybody to go to war. When you sign up, you know that's part of the deal. But when we had a draft, it was kind of mostly kind of equal opportunity, but not completely. Is that your?
Well, I guess
It's not really destructive of your rights necessarily, but you could make the case that in a draft situation, particularly an inequitable draft, where, for example, in Vietnam, poor people were much more likely to get drafted than wealthy people, proportionally. You could make the case that that's an unjust deprivation of liberty of the people.
now that the consequence would be going to jail. So, is there really a way to alter or abolish that? Well, would there?
So the question is, how do you alter or abolish that kind of a situation? In the short term, altering or abolishing it is the same solution as we were talking about here, and that is elections. And you work to get people who are going to make different political decisions elected.
Because at the time, this is what was in place.
Right. At the time, there was no solution. And the last part of the Declaration is a whole list of grievances against the king. These are all things the way the king had destroyed their rights, had refused their efforts to reconcile and solve these problems. So they just said, we just can't take them anymore. But in our system, the framers built into our system the solution, which is regular periodic elections. All right. Last point about the Declaration. In addition to being this legal and philosophical justification for their rebellion, Donald Lutz, as a professor at the University of Houston, pointed out that this is also in the form of what at the time was being written as social compacts. That is, agreements by political leaders and communities at the time about the fundamental character of the relationships in their community, especially the relationship between the government and the governed. So it's a fundamental set of relationships there. And this then, once you have this set of core values about what your community is like, that then enables you, it gives you a structure and a basis for setting up a governmental system. And in the research that he did, he found that of the 13 states at the founding period in 1776, 12 of them in their state constitutions basically had two documents. They had a social compact that defined the relationships in the state and basic rights, and then they had a separate document setting up the government. There was only one state, I think it was Delaware, I could be wrong, there was only one state that had the social compact as part of the Constitution. So what he was saying is that at this time in American history, it was quite common to have two documents that go hand in hand, one setting up the social compact, and then another setting up the institutions of government. So what we see is we have to remember, as you know already from chapter 2 in the textbook, is that the Constitution we're on now is our second Constitution. The first Constitution was called the Articles of Confederation. So the Congress passed the Declaration in 1776, and then by the spring of the following year in 1777, they had written the Articles of Confederation. That is, they had set up their own government. They hadn't yet attained their freedom from Great Britain, but they were setting up their own system. So the social compact led them to the values, or expressed the values that led them to the principles to set up the government, how they get to implement that into a governmental system. But as you know, what happened to the Articles of Confederation? How'd that go? Didn't go very well. As you read about in chapter 2, the Articles of Confederation basically failed for a whole host of reasons, and the textbook talks about those reasons. But in this case, the governmental system doesn't work. And so if it turns out that your political system fails, it doesn't mean you have to renegotiate everything. It means you can retain your social compact, your statement of social values, and create a new system of government. And that's what they did. The Articles of Confederation failed, so they used the same principles, and they wrote a new system of government. They set up a new set of institutions in 1787. So the Articles of Confederation lasted for 10 years, broke down for a wide range of reasons, and so they created the new Constitution in 1787 as a do-over. But as part of the do-over, they didn't have to renegotiate with each other about whether or not there were unalienable rights and what those rights were and the purpose of government. That was already done. And they could take that same set of principles and then apply it to a different set of governmental institutions. Questions? Okay. So, big picture. There's a legal argument that the Declaration makes. There are three parts to the legal argument. First, there's a higher law than the king. And they basically said it doesn't matter whether you're coming at this from a Judeo-Christian perspective or coming at it from a natural law perspective. Both are compatible with this view that there exists a higher law, and that this higher law, coming from the secular thinking of the Enlightenment and the religious thinking of Christianity, supports the idea that each individual has natural rights. The king, as the steward of those rights, had instead become destructive of those rights, violating the higher laws of nature and of nature's God. So the legal argument here is you're committing treason by going against the crown. Their argument was the crown is violating God's law. The crown is violating the law of nature. So it's really the crown, the king, who is the one at fault here, not us. This is a legal argument that was meant to protect them and support them if the revolution failed and they were all being tried as traitors. They use this leverage then to say this justifies our altering the fundamental relationship that exists between the British government and the colonies. And we're going to abolish that relationship and we're going to set up our own. Questions? Okay. Last, understand the Declaration of Independence as a statement of the basic values of the American community at the time that set up the principles for establishing a new government.